hospital. 2 others are still being treated, but expected to recover. Officials say the suspect had no known disciplinary issues. He was arrested for a DUI in Dade. In Moscow, President Putin explaining he's hoping to meet with President Trump in person next week, possibly in the United Arab Emirates. Putin spoke the day before Mr. Trump's deadline for reaching a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine. Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor.
President Trump has the ability to lay down conditions. There has to be very soon a 3-way conversation. It can't just be a 2-way conversation between the Russians and Americans. The Ukrainians have to be there.
President Trump's higher tariffs on more than 60 countries and the EU went into effect this morning. The new rates are expected to lead to higher prices on everything from furniture to cars here in the U.S. One auto manufacturer is already reporting a drop in profits and cutting its forecast. WWJ's Jeff Gilbert.
Toyota brought in 3% more revenue in the April to June period, but saw its profits decline 37%. Toyota says tariffs cost it $3 billion. The world's largest car maker still posting $5.7 billion in earnings, despite other issues, including an unfavorable exchange rate.
A new study finds California's wildfire season is starting earlier and earlier.
The study published in the journal Science Advances says the state's fire season now starts in the spring, 46 days earlier than it did 3 decades ago. And the researchers expect the fire season will continue to move up in the calendar. They blame climate change, which has the snowmelt starting earlier and soil and vegetation drying out sooner.
And making those grassy fuels more readily available to burn.
Cal Fire Battalion Chief Robert Wetstein. What used to be considered a seasonal threat is now a year-round concern. Michael Wallace, CBS News.
Meta's taken the wraps off Instagram updates with new features like reposting content and a location map. Tech contributor Ian Scher.
These features on their own may not seem that important, but they mirror critical things that have helped Snapchat and TikTok to stand out from what Instagram is offering.
This is CBS News.
Progressive Insurance, with insurance for cars, home, boat, motorcycles, RVs, and commercial vehicles at 1-800-PROGRESSIVE and Progressive.com.
This is Downtown Dade. How would you like to be able to promote yourself, your business, or someone else's business for less than the cost of one 60-second commercial on many Tampa Bay radio stations? Here's the deal. You can have your own 1-hour radio program on the TAN Talk Network for less than the cost of one 60-second announcement on many Tampa Bay stations. Your program will be on 2 Tampa Bay radio stations and will cover 4 million people in Florida, plus worldwide on the internet in both audio and video. And you'll have a web link for your business on the TAN Talk 1340 website. We provide the producer, the state-of-the-art equipment, free production of commercials, and much more. Check it out today. Call Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at 727-510-7622. That's 510-7622. Call Lola O'Brien now, 727-510-7622. Call now, and your 1-hour radio program can start tomorrow. Call 510-7622 for Lola O'Brien, the Irish Hawaiian, at the TAN Talk Radio Network.
Tune into the Shrink and Wrap Show here on TAN Talk Radio. Our stories and our topics will include, but are not limited to, everyday issues. We're here for you, for our listeners. We want to know what's important to you. So again, don't miss us on TAN Talk Radio. Tune in again, Shrink and Wrap Show. We'll see you then.
That's the Shrink and Wrap Show every Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. right here on the TAN Talk Radio Network.
Hey, you new to the area or just want to know about the best hidden gems and upcoming events? Stay tuned. Be Local Buzz with Devin takes you to these places, introduces you to the best businesses, and tells you about upcoming buzz. Preset your radio to TAN Talk 1340 AM or 106.1 FM every Thursday from 4 to 5. That is the Be Local Buzz with Devin on TAN Talk 1340 AM and 106 FM every Thursday from 4 to 5. Looking forward to speaking with you.
Hi, I'm Dawn Reese with the Dawn Reese Show, most powerful names in entertainment, every Thursday at 5 p.m. I have so many different segments I'm so excited to share with you, from miracle stories to celebrity interviews with Hollywood connections to travel, and soon the Housewives of Florida, to local business promoting your business on the air with me, an amazing opportunity to grow your business. Tune in to the TAN Talk Radio Network, 106.1 FM on Thursdays, 5 p.m. with me, Dawn Reese.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's TAN Talk Radio Network.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the TAN Talk Radio Network. Now, here is your host for today's program, Ed Golly.
Well, the convicted felon had a really bad week last week, which he ended by throwing a wild tantrum Friday, firing Bureau of Labor Statistics Chief Dr. Erica McIntyre because the BLS jobs report showed that his tariff tax plan is failing to generate his golden age of economic prosperity for America. Deeply respected, Dr. McIntyre had broad bipartisan backing for her appointment and had been confirmed by the Senate for her position 86-8. Paul Krugman called it Caracas on the Potomac. We'll get back to that in a few minutes. Things are bad for Trump, but are likely to get worse, and they have. The data is now clear. Trump's economic agenda is bringing real material harm to the American people. And what he has done in response to this failure of his economic plan and its rejection by Americans, he's doubled down. This week, he's drastically increasing tariffs on all goods imported into the U.S., which means prices will keep rising. Interest rates will remain high. Consumers and businesses will continue to be harmed. Our allies will be even more angry with America and other nations more reluctant to invest in America. Simply, he was wrong about how all this would play out. His agenda of sabotage, plunder, and betrayal is bringing slower growth, explosive deficits, higher prices, a battered healthcare system, a weaker country. He's attempting with all his might to shift the tax burden from the wealthy to all the rest of us. His mass deportations are harming farmers and small businesses throughout the country. His attacks on science and universities will leave our young people with fewer opportunities and make our companies less globally competitive. And he's making energy more expensive and making it harder for us to win the battle for clean energy technology against the Chinese. Trump announced 25% tariffs against goods from Mexico. Now, just this week, up to 50% on India, along with 50% against goods from Brazil and 15% from the European Union and Japan. But joining me today on The Voice of Reason, my co-host, attorney, and former circuit court judge, Kevin Carey. Kevin.
Hello, Ed. How are you doing today?
Talk to me.
Well, there's a lot to chew here. But the playbook has not changed. When you look at, you mentioned the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. He doesn't like the labor news, so he just fires the head. He doesn't like the Federal Reserve chair. He threatens to fire him. He doesn't like the Bureau. He doesn't like the Congressional Budget Office, CBO. All three of those are not political entities. So he doesn't like any of those, and he's unhappy, so he'll just fire whomever he can. He badmouths all three of those. So the point is, Ed, that he wants to avoid what the facts are, and if no one else can give those labor reports or the inflation issue or whatever other issue is out there, I think, frankly, a recession could soon be on the way.
Now, what Krugman was referring to when he called it Caracas on the Potomac is this: Nicolas Maduro's regime down in Venezuela has now turned its sights on those who dare to describe the collapse of their economy. In recent weeks, authorities have detained economists, analysts, and digital platform operators who publish independent financial data, intensifying a campaign of repression aimed at concealing Venezuelan worsening economic crisis. The people are being arrested down there following the publication of alarming inflation data by the independent Venezuelan Finance Observatory, which reported an annualized inflation rate of 229% as of May of this year. The Central Bank of Venezuela, which is controlled by Maduro loyalists, stopped releasing official inflation figures in October of 2024 when prices began surging again. Now, that's the same thing that's going to happen, is already beginning to happen here in this country. When Trump doesn't like the figures, he just puts in some lackey who will report figures that he wants to hear or no figures at all.
Well, I want to make a few comments. One, Trump does. He is a convicted felon, but he's been a BS artist his entire life. That got him through until the pandemic in his first term. That you could not BS when you're talking about Clorox and whatnot. You had the doctors cringing on the side in the Oval Office as he was saying this stuff. But the economy, as well as maybe even Epstein, but the economy could be that same factor here, Ed, where he can't BS his way through it. People know when they go to the grocery store that they're paying more. So when Trump makes the point that inflation is not what it is, they know it. When they go get gas, and he says gas is below $3 a gallon, and they go get gas and it's $3.25 a gallon. So they know what he says is not true. The problem with Trump is he's set the bar so low, we have no expectation of what he says is being true. But the bigger issue, I would say, in general there, Ed, is we have half this country now thinking that basic scientific facts are not true, and that would include economic facts as well. There's no sense of any economic reality. He's pushing the Fed Chairman Powell to lower interest rates when there's no reason at all to lower interest rates right now.
In fact, you're right, because lowering those interest rates would trigger inflation and possibly a recession. In fact, and probably a recession. You notice, if you recall, and I know you do, back when Biden was president, the consensus was that we were headed for an inflation, and it was all but inevitable that it was going to happen in something like the third year or last year of his term. And yet, because of the way the Fed managed the interest rates, it never happened. And in fact, we ended up with the strongest economy in the world, almost doing double the GDP of the European Union. Our economy was the envy of the world. Now, Trump will tell you it was a disaster, but that's because he doesn't deal in fact.
Given that we put so much money into the economy, you were getting a check. I remember getting a check with Donald Trump's signature on it. He wanted to make sure we knew it was coming from him. But so much money was put into the economy to avoid a depression, even worse than a recession. It was incredible that there was not a more significant problem. And it was, as you said, Ed, we as a country did much better than any other country economically. So, yes. And so now when Trump is saying there's no inflation, there's no this, there's no that, and the labor statistics, which are poor, would just fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics if the problem will go away. Mm-hmm. But again, the reality is when people don't have jobs or people are getting fired, the reality is what it is.
Yeah. Now, how familiar does this sound, Kevin? In April, Maduro granted himself sweeping emergency powers aimed at consolidating control over the economy, citing the need to protect Venezuela from the escalating global trade conflict triggered by U.S. tariffs. My question is simply this. The Constitution clearly spells out that Congress sets tariffs because tariff is a tax, and Congress determines what taxes are laid and collected, right, or levied. Maduro's doing the same thing that Trump is doing, which is simply declaring an emergency so that each of them can take control of the economy and levy these tariffs, which are then exacerbating the inflation and the high prices and causing the economy not to thrive, but to begin to go into a decline.
Well, one of the playbooks of this authoritarian system is to abuse this emergency situation and say everything's an emergency, which then apparently gives you the right, according to Trump, to issue all these executive orders, which he's done. And numerous federal courts have pushed back against it, but then you've got the appellate courts slowing it down. And so has DeSantis. He declared an emergency to provide for this Alcatraz, down there, alligator Alcatraz, which is almost $500 million. That there was no emergency there. So yes, part of the playbook is to abuse this concept of calling for an emergency. And yes, it's the same thing that people have done in other countries like Venezuela.
And one of the most common misconceptions we hear is that the Democrats are responsible for all the debt and the deficit spending. And yet what did the big ugly bill do? It raised the debt ceiling by $5 trillion because they know that it's going to require a lot more borrowing in order to accommodate these tax cuts for the uber rich. And in fact, in the first 9 months of the fiscal year, the U.S. government paid $749 billion in interest on the $37 trillion national debt, which is more than it spent on anything except Social Security, which of course is self-sustaining. So that's not like a discretionary expense. And it's only going to go higher as we borrow more money. Because one thing that these conservatives don't understand about tax cuts is that when the tax cuts are implemented, the first thing that happens is the Treasury takes in less money. So their argument is that it will it will
trickle down.
Yeah, it will stimulate the economy by giving people more money to spend. And then that will mean that the government will collect more in taxes. Well, it's got to begin by getting back even where they were before the tax cuts with respect to revenue. And the other thing they never seem to be able to remember is that when money is taxed and goes into the Treasury, the first thing that happens to it is it automatically gets spent. Whereas if wealthy people get a tax cut, they don't run out and spend it. I mean, these conservatives can't imagine what it's like to have a net worth of $300 million or $500 million or $1 billion. If you have that kind of net worth, you aren't waiting for a tax cut to go out and buy whatever you want, even if it's a house or a private jet. Or another house or an apartment in New York. You just go buy it. You already have it. So when you get the tax cut, you don't run out and spend it. It just adds to your wealth. And then it is not spent and consequently doesn't generate more tax revenue. And that's why every time we have these tax cuts, whether it was under Baby Bush or Trump in 2017, what happened to the deficits? They went up, because there's not enough income to cover the tax cuts.
Yeah, the last balanced budget was under a Democrat, Bill Clinton, back in the 90s. And it was not always because just of governmental policies. I mean, a lot of the economy is based upon issues other than that, including back in the 90s with the high tech world. But the two things that happen with what's happening in this most recent bill and in the past with Republicans is it, as you said, Ed, it does increase the deficit, but it's also a transfer of funds from the poor to the rich.
Exactly.
Because they're cutting services to the poor. So the poor that, they maybe can identify it dollar for dollar, but ultimately both of those factors are negative.
They're boasting about how much money it's putting into the Treasury. But where is that money coming from? It's a tax on the consumers that typically, what is it, like 40% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. They can't save any money.
Right. So that disproportionately affects the middle class and the poor.
And where is that 49 billion in interest going? It doesn't go into their pockets. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, you don't have a portfolio that has Treasury bills in it and stocks and so on, right? Those T-bills are bought by either wealthy investors or pension funds or the Chinese or the, other governments or whatever. They're the ones that benefit from that money being taxed from the working people and then transferred to the wealthy through the interest payments on the debt that they're holding for this country.
Yeah, there are two negative additional factors. One is, as you said a minute ago, Ed, the discretionary issue or the ability of the government to make decisions is lessened when you've got increasing interest on the debt. And the second negative factor I want to add is I do think there's a moral obligation not to impose upon our children and grandchildren this higher debt. When did that make sense? To say that's like saying to your grandchildren, I can't pay my mortgage. You'll pay it when I'm dead. When was that okay?
That's why this economic policy is really driving us off the cliff. It's not a responsible way to be managing our economy. And when the results don't come out the way the president wants, we're going to replicate what's going on in Venezuela.
Well, it's going to be interesting. You know, one of my favorite commentators is James Carville.
Yes.
And his famous line when he worked for Clinton was, "It's the economy, stupid," which is true. And I think that's what hurt Biden and Harris was that, you know, the inflation was higher. People, I've heard discussions about, and we've talked a lot about due process and not hearings, and people, it bothers people, but they're not as bothered by that as they are about inflation, employment, things like that, because it directly affects them.
And that's why this gerrymandering in Texas, if they're able to pull it off, may backfire on them, because the Republicans are now starting to think they have the Latino vote solidly in their pocket. But if by this time next year, the economy is in as bad a shape as it's projected that it will be, as a result of these steep tariffs, the voters may vote based on their wallet more than anything, and start putting more Democrats back in Congress, so that the Democrats take control of Congress, which is typical what happens. The other issue that still may affect the vote, which I know is concern to you, is the Epstein issue, which I know you think will still be with us by then. And with all the efforts that Trump is making to put that fire out, it just won't go away. It's like a California wildfire. You just can't put it out. Stephen Colbert offered this audio clip from a 2006 appearance on the Howard Stern show, when Donald Trump expressed his particular brand of Christian family values.
Now a lot of other stuff from Trump's creepy past is resurfacing, like this clip of Trump on the Howard Stern show back in 2006.
Do you think you could now be banging 24-year-olds?
Oh, absolutely. No trouble.
Would you do it?
I have no problem.
Yeah. Do you have an age limit, or would you?
No, I have no age. I mean, I have an age. I don't want to be
the
like
upper bracket,
Congressman Foley with 12-year-olds.
Wow.
Creepy is the right word. He did. There's no question. And that wasn't, some AI, produced. That was actual discussion he had with Howard Stern. Howard Stern spends a lot of time discussing sex issues. And, he talks about his daughter being hot. There's a woman who out of California who alleges that she was raped by Trump when she was 13. He told her she looked like his daughter, and then said, you're better off having your cherry popped by me than by some pimply faced teenager. My point is not to get too, creepy here, but this is how this man thinks. People don't, how can you tie him into Epstein? He thinks the same way Epstein does.
I think you're right. But will the story have legs that long? Because it's my contention that Trump's name does appear in those files, and probably in very incriminating ways, because of what you just said about him and how he thinks the same way that Epstein did. So he's not going to let that come out. And as you know, he controls the Justice Department. He controls Pam Bondi. So he's going to direct them to keep those reports undercover so it doesn't come out, because even a redacted report could offer enough information that his name could be connected to it through events that happened that we know he was in certain places at certain times, and then we can conclude that his is the name that's being redacted. Connect the dots and put him into the incriminating position in the Epstein issue.
Well, let me respond to that.
So the simple question is, do you think the story will still be an active story a year from now as the midterms start to form up for election?
Well, my honest answer is I don't know. But the last, when I see how corrupt this administration is, the last time, I can think about this was back in Watergate with Nixon. I was old enough. I was in high school then, to remember that. And you don't know what's going to happen. You remember the Saturday Night Massacre. They fired the attorney general. They fired the next attorney general. That's just how Trump operates. So you don't know which way these things will turn. What has happened since last Thursday was Maxwell was moved from a higher security prison in Tallahassee to a much lower Club Fed, as they say, in Texas, after she spent 2 days speaking with the attorney from the Department of Justice. And let me make another point there. Department of Justice doesn't have the authority to tell the Bureau of Prisons where to send a prisoner. And I can tell you as a former judge, a judge doesn't sentence John Smith and say, I want you to go to Leavenworth. A judge does not have any control over where a person goes when they're sentenced. So that had to come from the White House, is my point. So someone at the White House, and Trump lied. He said he had nothing to do with that. He pretty much lies every time he speaks. But now she's having problems. I understand in Texas, they're not happy with her being there. She should not be there. That she is a convicted sexual predator. And that is, by classification, she should not be there.
Now let's listen to Keith Olbermann, who gives us his take on the evolving Epstein issue.
The jobs reports will now be handled by the same guy who keeps score when Trump plays golf. While that scandal emerged, Trumpstein continued to explode anew. What is today being described as the traditional conservative coup to take back the Republican Party from Trump over Epstein. And Trump has now described the man who has called it that as a racist, sleazebag, low IQ individual dope. Good thing he didn't light that on fire any further. Plus, there's a Trump cover-up of the Epstein files, now a new Trump cover-up of his own name in the Epstein files, and a conservative coup against Trump over the Epstein files, plus the unexplained cushy new home for Epstein's co-rapist Ghislaine Maxwell, and the appointment of a registered sex offender who was arrested for statutory rape of a 16-year-old girl, the appointment of him to the President's Council on Physical Fitness.
Well, I like the name Trumpstein, by the way. I think that's that has to pick, like Watergate, that needs to get some legs. And I like Keith Olbermann. He says what's on his mind. He used to be a sports person, but he's more politics now. But I don't know. I will say this. Trump is scared to death of this issue. I have no doubt about that. There was a meeting, I understand, last night or the day before with the vice president and other people. They are scared to death of this issue because it won't go away. And with these kinds of issues, that you don't know what the next turn is going to be. Now, would I put it past Trump and his cronies to do anything illegal? No. I think Trump and his cronies will do whatever it takes. And it's taken me a while. You've been there for a while, Ed. It's taken me a while to get to that part. And Gary's always said that the bottom gets lower, and it does. But conspiracies and cover-ups, they're hard to, as we know in Watergate, they're hard to keep down or covered up for a period of time. All it takes is somebody to come forward, as John Dean did, for example. And there was Deep Throat with Woodward and Bernstein back with that. So it doesn't take much for something to break it. But even, for example, if let's say he pardons Maxwell, and you asked me about would it affect the midterms, which is the main point. I think Democrats need to gain control of the House in 2026, and we'll talk about Texas and how they're trying to steal that as well. But if he pardons Maxwell, I think you've got a pretty strong argument that this is an administration that doesn't give a damn about the fact that there were 1,000 girls affected by this that were sexually assaulted. And we need to be hearing more from these victims. I know there's some very good documentaries on Netflix and probably some other ones too. You can hear from these who are women now in their 30s. One, Virginia Roberts, committed suicide a few months ago, but they have been deeply affected by this. And you don't hear, by the way, anything from Trump about these girls and women. Nothing. Do you ever hear him say anything empathetic? Nothing.
Nothing. You're right. You're absolutely
right.
right.
What's that saying? The silence is deafening. And because he views this as a political problem. He is a narcissist. He's a narcissistic sociopath. So I don't know where this is going to lead, but I do know it scares them. I think between Epstein and the economic issues, I don't think it's going to be a good year for Trump.
And I think it'll be just as bad a year for the economy, which is just going to add to his problems.
Well, that's what I mean.
As much as he may want to cover those issues up by putting lackeys in these government positions to report phony numbers, I think you're right. The public is going to catch on and realize that they're getting phony numbers. The thing that concerns me is if independent press outlets like the media or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times start reporting numbers that are significantly different than what Trump lackey in the government reports, will he then sue those outlets, those media outlets, for several $1 billion apiece, claiming that they are delivering phony numbers or fake numbers? Just to give them grief, to tell them, no, you got to fall in line here, like the legal firms have and like the universities have, and like the other press outlets have, or the media outlets. And
well, he's done that. He's done that,
and so he would do it again. I think anything to stifle the truth.
Yeah, let me mention something though. Okay. As a lawyer and as a former judge, the Department of Justice, 25% of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice has either left or been fired.
Wow.
What's happening with the Department of Justice under Pam Bondi and Trump is disgusting. And I know Pam Bondi. She's from Tampa, as you know. But it's disgusting. It's corrupt. And we've given reasons for that in the past. But one of the things I'd like to mention briefly is, these lawyers, they can't just go into court and lie. Trump can. But a number of lawyers have been disbarred. Rudy Giuliani has been disbarred. Jenna Ellis has been indicted. Kenneth Cheeseborough, to give you some names. James Trupus, John Eastman, Christina Bobb, Jeffrey Clark, Sidney Powell. These are named. Michael Cohen went to prison. Aline Haba, Cleta Mitchell. These aren't, we're not making this up. These are specific lawyers who apparently decided they didn't really care about their bar license, or some of them were indicted. But it does matter. And that's one of the problems. If you're at the Department of Justice, Ed, and you're an honest person, it's hard for you to go into court and lie. In fact, you're not protected because Trump told you to do something, or Pam Bondi. If you're a lawyer, a judge expects you to tell the truth. And you've seen, and we have, I think, a clip of quite a few quotes from judges who are saying that what they're hearing is just not true, bad faith, etc.
We will play that in the second half of the program. It's time for a short time out for some important messages. When we return, we'll talk about that and also about the gerrymandering issue in Texas and what the possible consequences of that could be. You are listening to The Voice of Reason here on the TAN Talk Radio Network. Stay with me, Ed Golly, your host, and my co-host, attorney and former Circuit Court Judge Kevin Carey. We will be right back with more of the issues the conservatives never want you to hear about.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
You're listening to the Voice of Reason on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Hi there, I'm Robin Savage, stand-up comic. Are you sick of the news getting pushed around by two sides, always saying the other side is wrong? You deserve to enjoy the news.
That's what's up, Robin. I'm your host, Mac James, from Stand Up for News. We're stand-up comics, and we tell the news. The news doesn't have any legs and can't stand up for its own self. Join us and special guests like local hero comics like Donnie Stopa, all the way to legends like Tommy Chong, here on WTAN Radio.
Every Thursday night from 6 to 8 p.m.
And now it's time for the Only a Conservative Could Think It Minute with your host, Ed Golly.
If there's no such thing as a free lunch, there's certainly no such thing as a free plane. What might Qatar expect in return for a White Elephant 747? In the New York Times, David Sanger and Eric Schmidt report on the more immediate costs of refitting the plane for its new role as Air Force One. No one in government will talk about these costs, Sanger and Schmidt report. But the military appears to be raiding nearly $1 billion from a missile defense project to pay for Trump's pet project, all while achieving no savings on the plane. Only a conservative would ignore the Trump fallacy about government efficiency, an issue totally ignored when it benefits him personally. So much for the party of fiscal responsibility and cutting government expenditures. Think about that.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
And it's time for Poll Watch here on the Voice of Reason. Trump's probably does not want to hear this, or is going to have to find some new pollsters, because 37% of Americans approve of President Trump's handling of the presidency, which is a 10-point decline from January. In 6 months, his approval rating among independent voters has dropped even more, 17 points to only 29%.
Well, and that's the key. Someone was saying this last night on one of the shows. The MAGA people are probably, most of them will stick with Trump regardless. But the independents are the one who, because they're about a third of the voting electorate, and he's and rightly so, as you would expect. The independents who have no strong allegiance to Trump, those numbers are dropping quickly.
That's right, and the midterms are going to really show us how they're moving with respect to voting. Right now, 63% of voters have an unfavorable view of the Democratic Party, but 46% of voters say they would back a Democrat for Congress next year in 2026, compared with 43%, 3% fewer, who would back a Republican. So they may not like the party, but they may like the candidates, is I think the point that we're going to see when it comes to Texas next year. Now, we have an audio clip from Bulwark, which is that a podcast?
I think so.
Because you're the one that sent it to me. But they look at the possibility of the Texas gerrymandering scheme to steal more congressional seats and how this could backfire.
This appears to be, as you said, a bet by the Republican Party that they will hold on to their most recent gains among Latinos. The voters that they're putting in these districts are Latino voters. And they think, well, they're Trump voters. Yeah. It would be the most beautiful justice if having thinned out their margins to add these, that they lose not just these 5, but multiple other seats because they thinned the margins out and got swamped with, which is an entirely plausible scenario.
It is entirely plausible. If there is a wave election in 2026, that could indeed happen.
Right.
So, and also don't forget that the kinds of people who vote in off-year elections are not your typical Trump voter. You know, they are highly educated, more motivated to go to the polls. You know, they have become Democrats, these off-year elections. It used to be the other way around, but now that's the case.
Well, be careful what you wish for, and that's true. That ties into the gerrymandering issue, too, where people maybe don't realize, because the crazy becomes somewhat normal with Trump. It is to understand how desperate a move is for him to not follow the general census guidelines, which would be to every 10 years you look at redistricting, not every 5 years. So he knows he's got a problem because he's only got a 3-seat majority in Congress right now, and generally speaking, the out of White House party picks up between 15 to 20 seats. So he knows that there's a serious problem keeping the House, and if the House goes Democrat, there are going to be some significant investigations of all this craziness with him, and not just craziness, but corruptness.
And we may learn that there's only so far that gerrymandering can go to alter elections. Here's some fun facts about Texas. 60% of the population is now non-white. So that's Latinos and blacks and maybe a few Indians that have survived. But anyway, 25% of the population, only 25% is Republican white voters. But 75% of the congressional seats will belong to the GOP if the gerrymandered maps are redrawn. And here we've got this guy, I think he was the speaker of the legislature in Texas, claiming he's doing the will of the people by implementing these new gerrymandered districts. And he was, of course, bad-mouthing the Democrats who skipped the state so that they wouldn't have the quorum, and they can't do it right now in this special session, right? So, he says, well, they need to come back so we can implement the will of the people. How does he know that's the will of the people? If we put it to a vote and said, do we want representation that represents a cross-section of the population or 25% of the population, what would the will of the people be?
Well, Ed, we know for a fact that's not true, that statement. Trump said he got the highest percentage ever in Texas, which is false. He's not even in the top 5. He got 54% of the vote in Texas. Texas has gotten a little more Democratic. We keep hoping that'll change. But what they want to do, Ed, is in terms of Congress, make it about 90% Republican when you've got a state that is 54% voted Republican. So we know right there that fact is not true.
Now, lest you think that it's just me and my co-host, Kevin, who are all exercised about this, let's listen to a fellow who was speaking in an apparent town hall meeting, a Texas man who outlined some of the redeeming qualities of our United States president and his effort to redistrict Texas to unfairly gain congressional seats.
He cheated on his taxes. He cheated on his business loans. He cheated on his wives. He was caught cheating on video on the golf course. He cheated on the business contractors that he stiffed through 40 years of business, and he tried to cheat in the 2020 election. Now he's trying to cheat and win this 2026 midterm election because he knows he can't win. He has ordered Governor Greg Abbott to obey his command and cheat on the Texas redistricting scam to gerrymander 5 new, grossly and illegally drawn House districts. We are here because Texas is the first state under assault. If Texas House Republicans bow down to Trump like Abbott did, the other red states will follow. And if they do that, then America will be under assault. Pardon this word. I mean it in a philosophical way, not a sexual way, but he's asking every one of the Republican representatives in this room to be one of his prostitutes.
Ed, as trial lawyers, there's an acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid. I think he did a very good job in a very simple way in noting the issues. They're not complex. What Trump is trying to do is steal this election by improperly changing the number of Republican districts in Texas. And by the way, that's not going to be unresponded to, as you know. Gavin Newsom in California is pushing hard, really hard. I was surprised how hard he was pushing on this. The challenge he has is there is a independent commission there, but he's talked about ways to get around that. It would not be easy. So we're not in New York. The governor of New York has talked about it. So the fact that Trump says we'll do this in a red state, he acts like there aren't blue states out there. They're pretty damn big. New York's a big state. California's a big state. Illinois, which is, and they argue, they whine about Illinois being gerrymandered too much to the Democrats. I've never said Democrats are all saints, but I will say that Democrats, we do want fair districting. We're not saying pump it in our direction. I don't think they want fair voting. We, for example, in Florida, changed our constitution a few years ago to have a separate fair voting district. It hasn't occurred because of the Republican legislature.
And we know that Democrats gerrymandered districts and states when they were in control of mostly the South and the Southeast before Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act in the mid 60s, which is when all of those Democrats then became Republicans. It's funny how I hear some Republicans accuse Democrats of being the people who implemented Jim Crow laws and voter suppression. But what happened to all those Democrats after Johnson signed those bills and said there will be fair voting from now on and every citizen will have the right to vote? They all became Republicans, and that's what the Republican Party is now. And wouldn't you agree that the real solution to this is to get this districting process out of the hands of the government legislatures and the governors of all of the states and have it done really more like the California model, where it's an independent commission that's made up of equal numbers of Republicans and Democrats and maybe some independents put in that don't serve in politics. and could sit down and try to create the fairest maps that we can have so that we have true democracy in this country.
No, I agree with you, but we did that in Florida. We not only was it a law, we changed our constitution, and it's just being ignored by the legislature. So yes, you're right, but they don't want fair voting. They want voting in their favor. I mean, to say that we want to have 90% of the congressional seats in Texas be Republican by gerrymandering is just absurd. So you're going to see pushback from Gavin Newsom in California, from the governor of New York, Illinois, New Jersey's talked about it, although New Jersey is a fairly small state. I don't think it's going to work. It is fairly desperate. The other problem with that, Ed, is the courts are part of the problem there, because gerrymandering didn't just start yesterday. There's a whole body of law that's been out there for years and years, but the courts are accepting, for example, in North Carolina, plans that would have never been accepted 10 or 20 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, Kathy Hochul in New York came right out and said, we're going to fight fire with fire. We're not screwing around up here in New York. If you do this in Texas, we're going to be right behind you. Man, I would not want to argue with that woman about who's going to take the garbage out. She was ready to come over the table telling about how serious she is about doing this.
Well, Trump seems to have a problem understanding there'll be a response to something he does or says. And there are a lot of Democrats, and there's some big, as I said, Democratic states in this country that'll push back just the other way. You know, generally the switch back from party out of power is about 15 to 20 seats. I'm not sure gaining 5 will be enough, but it certainly is a desperate move on Trump's part. Again, understand, he is asking them to redistrict, which is done every 10 years. It's not every 10 years. But he's got these legislators that pretty much do whatever he says, regardless of how legal it is.
Yeah. Now, if Congress goes to the Democrats by a significant majority, 10 to 20, let's say 10 to 20 seats, that doesn't really change the Senate, because there are very few Senate races, and those are pretty established. So let's suppose that after the midterms, we find that the Democrats have indeed taken over the House, but not the Senate. Where does that leave Trump as America's first dictator? I mean, he's going to continue to try to govern by executive orders, right? He can't be impeached because the Republican whores in the U.S. Senate will always protect him. So what does that bring government to a stalemate effectively?
Well, let me address those kind of point by point. The Senate is going to be harder. It's not impossible. We're going to pick up North Carolina, I believe, with the very popular Governor Cooper. If Susan Collins retires in Maine, we could pick up Maine. I think is it 53-47 or right now? I think we're down 4 because 50-50 is broken by the. So we need to pick up 4 seats because the vice president would break a tie. So it is not that likely, but But yes, it would make a difference. Number one, there'd be investigations. Which we've seen that movie that happened in the Trump one. We also saw impeachments that start from the House. You also have issues about legislation. You're not going to get legislation passed, but as you just mentioned, this president has abused this executive order. But I'm not sure people understand this. This is something used by a president rarely. This is routine for him.
I know.
And it's illegal, and the courts are pushing back, and we don't know. He believes that. That he has the courts in his back pocket. And he's mad at the 3 he appointed to the Supreme Court. He believes have not been enough in his favor.
Right.
But in answer to your question, yes, it's going to make a difference. It'll make life much more difficult for him.
But when Congress sends bills that the Democrats pass down to the Senate, won't they be effectively dead on arrival because the Senate just won't hear them?
Well, I think you're going to have that. That's right. You've got the Senate and the House both. But by the way, if that 53-47 becomes 51-49, it's a little bit, it's still not the majority, but it's a little bit better. And again, these executive orders, which is how he's not now getting these through. He's got both houses right now, Ed, but he's not doing the hard work other than this bill. He's not doing this the way he should be doing it through the legislature.
Right. And of course, all of the executive orders seem to end up in court. I mean, as soon as he issues them, they're challenged. In fact, the whole issue of the tariffs that he's imposing, that he technically doesn't have the right to impose, but he declared some kind of emergency, again, being challenged in court. And we should be hearing some results on that soon.
Well, they come up from the federal district court, which is the trial court, to the appellate courts. And by the way, some of these federal judges have been threatened. There've been death threats, people showing up at their houses, literally at their houses. And Chief Justice Roberts needs to be speaking out to protect these judges. These judges should not be concerned about their life and their family's life, but because of their rulings.
Well, a lot of congressional representatives are certainly describing their utter contempt for the Constitution by the Trump administration. Listen.
The Trump administration is characterized by lawlessness.
Lawlessness. But don't take it from us. Let me give you the words of federal judges
appointed by both Democratic and Republican presidents, even by Trump himself.
Here's how federal judges describe Trump administration lawyers'
defense of numerous
illegal actions.
Deliberate evasion.
Very shoddy work.
Worthy of a 3-year-old.
Retaliatory. Disingenuous at best.
Riddled with inconsistencies.
Egregious cherry picking.
Interpretive jiggery-pokery of the highest order.
Nonsensical.
An obvious attempt to exercise power beyond the Constitution.
Deafening silence.
Criminally contemptuous.
Fundamentally incompatible with the basic promise of equal justice under the law.
Counter to our nation's 250-year history.
Wrong as a matter of law.
Willful and intentional noncompliance.
Lack of any evidence whatsoever. Blatantly unconstitutional.
Go ahead.
Well, again, keep in mind for our listeners, that is language from judges' opinions. That's not MSNBC or CNN's opinion. Those are senators who are reading, but those are judges who have been appointed by the various Republicans and Democrats. Again, that's not normal. Those are very serious allegations. And, God help these lawyers, with the bar associations when these come down the track.
Mm-hmm. Just the sheer contempt for science that the Trump administration has demonstrated, I think is a danger to the whole world, whether it's climate change or what this imbecile we have in the cabinet, Robert F. Kennedy, who announced in a statement Tuesday that 22 projects to develop vaccines using the mRNA technology will be halted. The Department of Health and Human Services will cancel contracts totaling $500 million and pull funding for some vaccines that are being developed to fight respiratory viruses like COVID-19 and the flu. That's just the latest in a string of decisions that Kennedy has made that have put the longtime vaccine critics' doubts about the shots into full effect at the nation's health department. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. And really, if Trump really cared about the health of the nation, he'd get rid of him. He got the votes that he needed from him, which is why he put him in that position in the first place. You remember, he was a presidential candidate and he wanted those votes, so he gave him a cabinet position.
By the way, Robert,
he has no medical training. He's a lawyer, and we all know what they're. Oh, well, never mind. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say he was not invited to the 4th of July Kennedy picnic this year. I read that last night. But you have a problem when half of this country or entire political party does not accept science. And that's exactly what's happened here. But in terms of Trump now, Trump doesn't buy into all this now anyway. He doesn't really care about all of this. He doesn't care about children getting sick because they're not getting vaccinated. He doesn't care about them getting, their teeth falling out because there's no more fluoride in the water like we have in Florida now. These would not have been debatable issues just a few years ago.
I know. He doesn't care about the record temperatures. 116 in Arizona. It's my understanding that above 110, it's just plain insufferably hot and you risk heat stroke. What's going to happen when this becomes more of the norm than the exception? Because it is becoming the norm every year. Can you see a day when the few people that are left that will work out in farm fields need to do the work at night under Klieg lights because it's just too hot and during the daytime? Their productivity will decline significantly when they're keeling over from heat stroke. And of course, with Holman's 3,000 a day quota, he's going for the low hanging fruit, right? Which are the farm fields, agriculture, construction, housekeeping, and hotels. Once all those people are gone, we're going to have a labor shortage problem.
Well, that's exactly right. I call these opportunity costs, meaning the things we should be working on, including this, and the issue with farm workers. And August is always a bad month. We have, football players die.
Yeah, you're right. I shouldn't laugh. You're right.
With the heat index in Florida, when it hit 100 last week for the first time, the heat index was about 112, 114. So, yeah, and that's something we should be focused on, including these farm workers who are putting themselves at risk other than being deported as well.
And yet, what does Trump tell us? Oh, it's all just a Chinese hoax. It's the same thing he's doing with the jobs numbers. When you don't like the job numbers, you fire the person that's in the head of the department. When you don't like the temperature, break the thermometer.
Governing is hard work. Trump never wanted to do the hard work of governing. So he picks up these issues like let's deport everybody, let's give taxes to the rich, and let's impose these tariffs. He does not want to do the hard work of governing.
And so he's diverting our attention from the problems he's creating. So, for example, what happened to annexing Canada as the 51st state, or restoring Alcatraz into a serviceable prison?
He's like a child who's got ADD.
Yeah,
he says something, but the point of it, he doesn't care about it when he says it, and it never happens.
Yeah,
there's no follow through.
The Panama Canal. That's just we don't hear about that. Or annexing Greenland, clearing the Gaza Strip and converting it into a luxury beachfront development, the Riviera of the Middle East. Of course, pretty much everybody's getting run out of there or starved to death, one or the other. So the land may be primed for that ultimately.
Well, here's the issue. I want to see at some point some Republicans, and there are a few, but not many, who are going to hold him accountable for this.
I hope so.
Because this is not just politics. This is corruption. It's not just politics, it's corruption.
It is. I mean, we've forgotten all about him releasing his tax returns that he said he would release after the audit, which has no control, which places no restrictions on him releasing the tax returns. He's just never done it because he knows that it would show how corrupt he is as a businessman, which is consistent with how corrupt he is as a president.
Well, he talks about indicting Obama and indicting Adam Schiff. It's a joke.
It is, and I understand that Obama may not even show up if he's subpoenaed. Can he just do that? Just not show up without concern of federal officials coming and, I don't know, arresting him and forcing him to sit for a deposition?
No, I mean, Steve Bannon went to prison for not showing up he ignored a congressional subpoena. So you can't ignore a subpoena. I don't think there'd be any immunity for Obama because he was president long ago. So he unlike Trump, I think he would probably honor the subpoena. He might file a motion to have it quashed, but I don't think he'd ignore it.
He would tie it up in court such a long time that the midterms would come and go, and then it wouldn't be an issue anymore, right?
Well, he would address it legally. He would do it legally.
Yeah, yeah. Jim Jordan ignored a subpoena as a congressman and got away with it.
Well, he should have been in jail like Bannon was.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, but it just shows that this isn't going to be the golden age of American prosperity. It's going to be the golden age of political corruption on a scale never imagined.
I think the big story the historians will suggest is how fragile this democracy is based on what has happened.
Because we've always taken for granted that it's stable and unwavering.
And yet, you're not going to have corrupt people running government.
Right. Well, that brings us to our quote for the day. Let's see. It was by Maya Angelou, and she said this: "When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Why don't I come up with stuff like that? Anyway, stay with us here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Upcoming is national and international news from CBS. And then you can join us again next Thursday for another edition of The Voice of Reason. And right now, I'd like to thank my co-host, former Circuit Court Judge Kevin Carey. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Make them prove it.
106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
Listen.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Steve Kathan. President Trump used social media to hail the new tariffs that have taken hold against dozens of countries as of today. CBS's Aaron Navarro at the White House.
The administration is projecting $300 billion in new revenue. That's up from the $77 billion collected from tariffs in 2024. That is money that goes to the Treasury and is, of course, worth watching on what the federal government does with that. They've talked about using that to pay down the national deficit, but President Trump has also said and entertained some sort of rebate check.
Well, CBS's Kelly O'Grady on the outlook for consumers.
Your Swiss chocolate is not going up immediately this morning because of these tariffs, because a lot of these companies have that inventory. Now, I will also note that if companies had ordered inventory before midnight tonight and it gets here before October 5th, they're not going to pay a tariff. So we expect a lot of companies did front load some of that ordering.
With secondary sanctions from the U.S. a possibility against Russia tomorrow, CBS's Ramy Inocencio reports there are indications of Vladimir Putin meeting with President Trump is taking shape.
President Putin has at least floated one possible country for that meeting to happen in the Middle East, and that is the United Arab Emirates.
The U.S. Army has honored 6 soldiers who helped end yesterday's shooting at Fort Stewart. First Sergeant Joshua Arnold was one of them.
We heard what sounded like gunshots. Immediately had medical services, combat medics, myself, and Sergeant Taylor respond. We rendered aid.
5 soldiers were wounded. An Army sergeant is in custody. United Airlines is working through the fallout today after hundreds of flights were grounded overnight due to a technical issue that the airline says has been resolved. CBS's Chris Van Cleve reports the Transportation Department's looking into it.
Secretary Duffy says he's been in touch with United CEO about this issue. United says it is not cybersecurity related. Delays and cancellations this morning largely have to do with planes that didn't make it to their final destination last night, so they had to cancel those first of the morning flights, including here in Indianapolis.
A new study from a group that backs tech regulation finds that ChatGPT told researchers posing as teens how to get alcohol and drugs, suggested how to hide eating disorders, even generated a suicide note. CBS's Jolene Kent.
The study found that with minimal pushing, like saying this research was being done for a project, the bot's guardrails were easily bypassed, and then ChatGPT would provide information that would otherwise violate OpenAI's content policy.
Wall Street, the Dow is down 200 points.